Have you ever heard of a trial where the defendant was a corpse? It sounds like something from a horror movie, but this is a real, dark chapter from history. This is the story of the Cadaver Synod, one of the most bizarre and macabre events in the history of the papacy. So, how did a dead pope end up in a courtroom, propped up on a throne, to face his accusers? To understand this grotesque spectacle, we have to travel back to the late 9th century, a time known as the Saeculum Obscurum, or the Dark Age of the papacy. Rome wasn't the glorious city we think of today. It was a battlefield for powerful aristocratic families, all vying for control of the ultimate prize, the papal throne. The papacy wasn't just a spiritual office. It was a position of immense political power and wealth. Popes were made and unmade not by divine will, but by the ruthless ambitions of factions fighting for dominance over central Italy. Our story revolves around two key figures: Pope Formosus and his successor, Pope Stephen VI. Formosus, before becoming pope, was a charismatic and successful bishop. He was so effective, in fact, that he made powerful enemies, including the then-Pope John VIII, who excommunicated him on what were likely trumped-up charges. Formosus was later reinstated, and in 891, he was elected pope himself. His reign, however, was anything but peaceful. He found himself caught between two powerful forces: the Italian Duke Sus, who controlled Rome, and the East Frankish king, Arnulf of Carinthia. Formosus, fearing the Spalitans' growing power, secretly invited Arnulf to invade Italy and be crowned Holy Roman Emperor, hoping Arnulf would restore order and protect the papacy. Arnulf marched on Rome and was crowned by Formosus, but he soon fell ill and had to retreat, leaving Formosus completely exposed to his enraged enemies. In 896, shortly after Arnulf's departure, Pope Formosus died. Some say of a stroke, others whisper of poison. The Spalitan faction wasted no time. They installed their own man, Boniface VI, who died just 15 days later. And then came our antagonist, Pope Stephen VI, a man fiercely loyal to the Spalitan cause and harboring a deep personal hatred for Stephen and his Spalitan backers. Formosus's death wasn't enough. They needed to erase him from history, to nullify every act, every ordination, every decision he ever made as pope. Why? Because Formosus had crowned their enemy, Arnulf, as emperor. If they could prove Formosus was never a legitimate pope, then Arnulf's coronation would be invalid, and their own claim to power would be solidified. And so, the stage was set for the most surreal trial in history. In January of 897, about 9 months after Formosus had been laid to rest, Pope Stephen ordered his body to be exhumed from its tomb in St. Peter's Basilica. The decaying corpse was dressed in full papal vestments, carried into the Basilica of St. John Lateran, and propped up on a throne to face judgment. The courtroom was filled with horrified clergy and Roman nobility. Pope Stephen himself acted as the chief prosecutor, screaming accusations at the silent, rotting defendant. Imagine the scene. The stench of decay filling the Grand Basilica, a living pope shouting questions at a dead one. Why did you, a mere bishop of another city, usurp the universal Roman see in your ambition? Stephen raged. A young deacon was appointed to speak for the deceased, tasked with the terrifying job of answering for the corpse. His trembling voice was barely a whisper against the Pope's furious tirades. The charges against Formosus were numerous: perjury, ambition, and illegally abandoning his previous post to become Bishop of Rome. The trial was a sham from the start. The verdict was predetermined. Formosus was found guilty. The punishment was as brutal as the trial was bizarre. The corpse was stripped of its sacred vestments. The 3 fingers of his right hand, the same fingers he had used for blessings and ordinations, were hacked off. All of his papal acts were declared null and void. This was a political earthquake. Every priest and bishop Formosus had ordained was now considered a layman. Every law he passed was erased. Chaos erupted throughout the church. The desecrated body was then dragged through the streets of Rome and, in a final act of humiliation, thrown into the Tiber River. It was a clear message to any who would dare oppose the Spalitan faction. But the story doesn't end there. The people of Rome were appalled. The grotesque spectacle of the Cadaver Synod turned public opinion violently against Pope Stephen. The desecration of a pope's body, regardless of politics, was seen as a profound sacrilege. The Tiber River, it was said, was cursed. An earthquake even struck the basilica shortly after the trial, which many took as a sign of divine wrath. Fishermen who later found Formosa's body floating in the river claimed it performed miracles. The backlash was swift and brutal. The Roman populace rose up in rebellion. Pope Stephen VI was overthrown, imprisoned, and later that same year, he was strangled to death in his cella Grimend for the man who orchestrated the ghoulish trial. The popes who followed tried to clean up the mess. Pope Theodore II, who reigned for only 20 days, held a synod that annulled the Cadaver, reinstated Formosus's acts, and gave his recovered body a proper papal burial. But the political turmoil continued. Just a few years later, another Pope, Sergius III, a bitter enemy of Formosus and an ally of Stephen, Camito Pope, he reaffirmed the rulings of the Cadaver Synod, once again invalidating Formosus's papacy and even holding a second trial for the long-dead pope. This dark and twisted saga, this cycle of exhumation, trial, and posthumous condemnation, reveals the raw, brutal politics that consumed the papacy during its darkest hour. The Cadaver Synod stands as a chilling reminder that when faith becomes entangled with a thirst for power, the result can be more horrifying than any fiction. It is a testament to a time when the Holy See was less a spiritual guide and more a battlefield for power-hungry families, willing to go to any lengths of and desecrating the dead to secure their ambitions. Thanks for watching. And if you found this piece of dark history fascinating, be sure to like and subscribe for more stories from the forgotten corners of the past.